Okay. So I was just saying before, maybe now that it's on Zoom and recording, I shouldn't say it, but I was just saying before that I think I gave a shir on Lashon Hara on a Shabbos afternoon a year ago. Now, the plus to that is it can't be recorded. So I could say whatever I wanted to say. The minus to that is the heat I got for that shir. I don't think I've ever given a more controversial shir in my life. And I didn't think it was controversial. So since then I've learned, and Emunah Hashem, we'll see how controversial any person actually finds this. But hopefully tonight we'll be able to give with some level of clarity, just an introduction to the laws of Hilchos Lashon Hara. Not just an introduction, obviously we want to be able to understand some of the details of what we are allowed to say, what we're not allowed to say. Nowadays is unbelievable the access we have just at the tip of our finger, right? A person can access anything of what's going on in the world. And really it's a question of what should we be reading? What can we be reading? What can we be saying? What should we be saying? And it's a question that really a Jew, we ask ourselves this in life all the time, meaning what does Hashem want of me right now, the here and now? And that applies to what I'm eating. It applies to how I interact with other people in the Rabboni Sholem. And certainly it applies with everything I say, right? So Emunah Hashem, the goal tonight is to be able to look into the background of Lashon Hara. And specifically tonight, again, the topic was when information goes public, news reports, consumer reviews, social media. So Emunah Hashem, we'll cover all these topics tonight. And the great news for everyone here is that we have to finish before Mincha. So it can't go over Mincha. So you're not stuck too long. So I was reminded, I saw this back during Shavuos time. So there was a Mrs. Moskowitz was in her house cooking a cheesecake. And next door neighbor yelled out the window looking in and said, "Oh my gosh, it smells great. Can I have some cheesecake?" And Mrs. Moskowitz turned back to her and says, "What are you doing looking into my house? Mind your own business. Come on, keep your business to yourself. Put your head back in. And anyway, you're fleishigs." So we live in a world where everyone knows everything. Everyone knows everything in life, right? And the question is, how much do we really need to know? What's pertinent to us? What's not? And then again, what should I be saying? So let's delve into it. And I'll put it out. This is like a Shabbos afternoon shir, which anyone has a question at any point, please, throw out the question. That includes Zoom, anyone in person. Yes. Oh, I forgot. Yes. Thank you so much. I am going to throw. What? Yeah. Thank you so much. I am throwing into the chat. I apologize. I am linking right now a source sheet. Thank you, Menashe. Okay, I just threw into the chat a source sheet. So for anyone who would like on Zoom to be able to have access to it, whether to print it out, whether to just pull it up on your computer, feel free to do so. Emunah Hashem will be following the sources that I just included. Okay, so really we first have to ask just a basic question, and that is, where does Hilchos Lashon Hara show up in Shulchan Aruch? Right? Where does it show up? If I'm going through the Shulchan Aruch, I wake up in the morning, I wash my hands, eventually I get to my meal, I die. So where does it show up in the Shulchan Aruch? And the truth is, if you go just through the Shulchan Aruch, so it doesn't inherently, there's no siman that says these are the rules of Lashon Hara. Obviously, the Chafetz Chaim in his Magna Opus, besides from the Mishnah Berurah, wrote the Chafetz Chaim as we know him as. But that being said, it's not in the Shulchan Aruch per se. There's a Mishnah Berurah. The Mishnah Berurah brings it down, and he talks about in Siman Kuf Nun Vav. Obviously, if the Mishnah Berurah, if Yisrael Meir Kagan authored the Mishnah Berurah and the Chafetz Chaim, you should expect him to reference it there. So he does, and he references this idea of Lashon Hara. But as a whole, it really isn't brought down in halacha in Shulchan Aruch like you would expect. So I saw a number of different ideas, but one of the ideas is the concept of watching our speech and how we interact with other people is such a pervasive concept throughout Yiddishkeit that it doesn't need to come along and tell us that this is exactly an outline here and now, this is what you need to be doing with your speech. Throughout halacha, we always see these references, or we see moments where halacha says you have to be careful with what you say. And if you have to be careful what you say, so all the more so just the idea of uttering something that could cause harm to a person, that could embarrass a person, it's a total anathema to Yiddishkeit. And so that's one suggestion I saw to say it doesn't just need to be outlined, because it's like derech eretz kadma Torah. It's a presupposed idea that we should realize just on a logical sense that how can I come along and say something to damage other people? Now, when it comes to Lashon Hara, that really is the baseline definition. meaning the idea, the definition of Lashon Hara and Rechila, so the they mean different things. But the Rambam in source 1 tells us, Echad mesaper b'Lashon Hara b'fnei chaveiro, o shelo b'fanav, v'hamesaper dvarim shegorimim im nishmeu ish mepi ish lahazik chaveiro b'gufo o b'mamono, v'afilu lahatzar lo o lahafchido harei zeh Lashon Hara. The Rambam lays out the halacha in Hilchos Deos, and he says, anyone who speaks Lashon Hara in front of his friend, or not in front of him, and he tells things about this person that if they're heard, they're going to cause damages to this friend, to this person, even if the damages are not monetary or not physical, but they're going to embarrass him, they're going to cause him some level of discomfort and pain. That's Lashon Hara. So Lashon Hara on a base level is something that's going to cause someone pain, that's going to actually have a negative influence on someone's life. And we could wonder, just imagine for a second, that if a person were to utter something and say something that's not going to directly have a negative impact on someone's life, but it's still a negative thing to be saying. Let's say it's possible that this won't have any effects on that person. It won't damage him, it won't hurt him. So is it still Lashon Hara? Is it still Lashon Hara to say something that's negative, right? If the idea is it's going to cause damages, so seemingly I would have said, so Lashon Hara, bad language, is something that damages someone, lahazik, right? It damages in some fashion or form. So to be able to understand just this idea, first of all, it's to realize that we always think, free speech is free speech. I think Rabbi Grossman talked about this a number of Shabbosim ago. See, we think free speech, in America, Baruch Hashem, we live in a place of freedom and we can utter whatever we want, and that goes under the ability to be able to say what I want. But the truth is just because I can say what I want, that doesn't absolve me from the effects and certainly the moral implications of whatever comes out of my mouth. I might be able to freely say whatever I want, but certainly from a Jewish perspective, that's not completely true. And there have to be implications on a moral level, on a hashkafic level, on a halakhic level. What comes out of my mouth could actually have an effect in a negative or positive way. So now it's not just in how it might affect someone, but it might be how it affects ourselves, right? We have to look at it. The idea of just saying Lashon Hara itself might be a problem, even if it's not ultimately going to damage someone. Just look at the psukim itself. The Torah tells us in Vayikra, Leiselech in source 2, Rachil be'amecha, Leisamol dadam re'echa ani Hashem, that we shouldn't go along, passing along gossip. Leiselech Rachil, we shouldn't just go along passing gossip. And that seemingly is this idea that we shouldn't just be gossiping, saying things. There's not really, it doesn't need to be that there's a damage right there, but the very concept that you would have a personality of a person who would go along saying, I can say whatever I want about anything I want and about whoever I want. So that itself is a midah gerua. That itself tells you a lot about a person. And that's obviously not something that we want to have within us. That's not a midah. That's not an attribute which we want to exhibit, right? So on some level, there's one aspect of Lashon Hara that just relates to being a good person, relates to me. And on the other level, there's, as we said, coming from the Rambam, there's another aspect, which is in source 3, Leisisa Shem Hashav Al Teshes Yadecha Im Rasha Lios Eid Hamas, that we shouldn't accept false report, meaning a person shouldn't go along being a false witness, bearing false witness, saying false things. And that seems to be something that actually has an effect on a person. If I come along and I say something not true about another person in court, that obviously has implications on his life. And it need not just be in court. In life, it could have implications, negative effects in his life. So basically, we can see that when it comes to Lashon Hara, there's always this duality, these two aspects which we have to keep in mind. There's the effects the Lashon Hara has on other people, and then there's just the idea that it's a bad midah, a bad attribute, that you would have such a person who is willing to say such things about other people in this world, right? That's the duality. Those are the two aspects of Lashon Hara. And sometimes there perhaps are going to be differences between the two. Let's say that this person doesn't care. Let's say there's a person who doesn't care what I say about them, right? They really don't care. It's hard to say that a person wouldn't care, but imagine they really don't. So can I say whatever I want about them? And they'll laugh it off. They really don't care. So imagining that could be true. So from the aspect of causing damages, embarrassing them, hurting them, it's true that might not happen. But from the character aspect of it, The fact that I could have negative things come out of my mouth about other people, so that itself might be a problem. And we'll see multiple examples over the next few shiurim where this might play out. But it just frames the idea of Lashon Hara not just being something that's always negatively affecting someone, but the idea of how I relate to what I say and how I relate to other people through that. There's also the closest we get to the language of Lashon Hara, right? Lashon Hara is the bad language, the evil speech. The closest we get to that perhaps is in Devarim, in source 4, that when you go out to war, al eivecha, you should be aware of everything evil. And the Ramban says, perhaps this also means you should be aware of everything evil, meaning don't speak Lashon Hara. Because when you go out to war, you have to have a unified front. And if you start speaking Lashon Hara and this person is against that person, this person behind that person's back, it'll totally destroy the unity which a person needs, which Klal Yisrael needs to be able to fight a war together. Right, so that's already one reference which we see, besides for obviously the reference where Miriam is punished for Lashon Hara, and we always have to remember that, but this is yet another reference over there. So that's when it comes to this idea of saying Lashon Hara. Now again, tonight we're going to talk a lot about when it goes public, when people know about it, writing consumer reports, telling other people to go or to buy this product or not. So there's also not just speaking Lashon Hara, but there's an isser to accept Lashon Hara, right? If someone says Lashon Hara, so I am not allowed to believe it. Now, when I'm not allowed to believe it, so what does that mean? Does it mean I'm not allowed to believe it and therefore I have to totally erase it from my mind? So there is a discussion about this because ultimately we're human. So maybe what it means is I can't help but believe it, but I can't act on it, right? Another way to say it would be I can't believe it, but to the degree that if it was stated in a permissible way, so then I can be choshesh for it, meaning I can suspect it, I shouldn't act on it, but I can be aware of it, right? And that, yes. Yes, exactly. As the point you're saying, the rabbis do criticize Gedalia for not having accepted. He didn't have to believe what was being said, that his life was at stake, but he should have at least been aware of it and maybe being more careful about it. And that's where we find this idea of, in certain cases where Lashon Hara, there's a reason to be able to say it. Is it really called Lashon Hara? In that case, we'll see. But yes, so in that case, the person accepting it, so it's not the idea of acceptance, but at least to have a little bit more of an awareness, right? Not be so naive. Okay, so that's just a little bit of a background when it comes to Lashon Hara. And the truth is, if you look in source 5 in the Shari Tshuva, he also kind of outlines these two aspects. There's the aspect of the saying something that's going to damage, but then there's the aspect that a person would willingly choose to go out and say something negative about another person. And that itself is already a problem. That itself is something we want to avoid in life, not just because it might damage someone, but because the character trait, what it does to my soul, to my psyche. Okay, so now that being said, we understand, and the Chafetz Chaim goes through an entire introduction to how bad Lashon Hara is. I don't think we all came here to learn how bad Lashon Hara is. I think we understand it's bad, okay? So now let's understand, when might it be permissible, right? And I'm not not to say, let's go try to find when I can say Lashon Hara, but it's important to understand the Gedarim. It's important to understand the boundaries and what is not Lashon Hara, because sometimes something should be said, sometimes something has to be said. And if I'm balancing this in my mind, at least somewhat aware of it, so perhaps we'll be a little bit more careful about what comes out of our mouths. So the Chafetz Chaim in Lashon Hara, in Klal Yod, so he lays out seven rules when something is constructive, and when it's constructive and for a purpose, and following these rules, it could be that a person could say something. And it might be that they're expected, that they should be saying something, right? Now, by the way, it's just really interesting if you think about it. Truth is, when it comes to all halacha, we don't really have this concept of it's for a purpose. Treif, eat treif, it's for a purpose, right? Right? Okay, yes. Okay, Michal Shabbos, yes. There. Good. So I just said that there's no time that we find that you can do an aveir, you can do something that's forbidden for a purpose, right? If it's toelis, yay, conditions, it's purposeful. Yes, there's the exception of to save one's life, to save other people's lives, but that's a general rule. We never find these small little details within a law of it's forbidden to eat treif. except with these 7 conditions, let's go, right? That's not how it works. So it's fascinating when it comes to Lashon Hara that you can have a concept of toelis, that it's purposeful and therefore it's permissible, right? Obviously with the 7 conditions, which we'll lay out. So actually in source 7 in Bot Hashiv, Rav Yaakov Zaida, so he tells us something very interesting. He basically says, and again tonight, just for time purposes, as much as I like including so many Makaros because it looks so pretty, I don't think we'll read through every single one. But he basically says, when something is purposeful, when the intention is not to harm, when the intention is not to spread, to cause any negative effects, when the intention follows the 7 rules, so then it's not called Lashon Hara anymore. It's not called Lashon Hara, it's called Lashon Tov. It's good language, right? So it's not like when it comes to eating treif. So there's 7 conditions and then it's kosher, right? That's not, treif is treif. But when it comes to Lashon Hara, and following the rules of making something purposeful, and then there's a reason. There's a reason for what I'm saying, so it's no longer Lashon Hara. It's called Lashon Tov. There's a purpose to it, right? So that's why Lashon Hara might be a little bit of an exception when it comes to Isurim, because it's not that I'm flipping the Isur and now the Isur is permissible. It's that it's no longer what it was. So what are these 7 conditions? So the Chafetz Chaim lays out 7 conditions. In source 6, he says as follows. First of all, She'yira zehadavar b'atzmo. You have to know it to be true. Whether you saw it yourself or you know 100% that it's true. You have to know that. And the fact that 2 of them are grade, number 1 and number 3, because sometimes those conditions, you don't always need to know yourself 100%, meaning someone could have told you, and for sure they're trustworthy and and when it comes to business matters or the like, that makes a difference. But the second condition is shizahir ma'od shelo yaklit tekef as inyan b'daito. So first of all, you also have to not run to assume that what you see is true, right? You can't assume automatically that this is theft, that this is damage, that what this person is doing is wrong. You have to sit there and actually think about it, right? We often jump, right? Do something right away. We have to be misponim. We have to give it consideration. The third rule is shiochiach esachote mitchila u'b'lashon raka. If appropriate in certain situations, you should, instead of saying Lashon Hara and going around speaking about this person, ideally you should go over to the person themselves and say, do you know about this? Or do you mean to be doing this? Maybe you shouldn't be doing this, the idea of rebuke. Now, that's also in gray, because if you have someone obviously trying to rip people off, the person is probably not really going to listen to you, and presumably it would cause more damage. And so in that case, there would be a dispensation where that's not going to actually help the situation, to leave that condition aside. The fourth condition is shel yagdil ha'avla yoser mima shehi. You also have to not exaggerate, right? We have to make sure that whatever we're saying is exactly the truth, right? When we talk about product reviews, so I could say about this entire distributor, entire seller, all their products are garbage, right? I bought this one thing and that tells me they are no good. And that would be inappropriate. It might be that the one thing that they sold you would not recommend other people purchase. And you want to make sure people stay clear of it. But to totally write off their entire business as such, that's obviously not okay. The fifth condition is she'echavin l'toeles. You have to be doing it purposefully with trying to actually rectify a situation, not for your own benefit, not because you hate the person. Number 6, you should do that. If there's another way to go about this besides for speaking Lashon Hara, try to avoid the Lashon Hara and do it another way. And number 7 is you also have to make sure that whatever you're saying is not going to result in a worse punishment to the person than they deserve. Let's say someone is cheating people. And really, if you tell on him, if you make people aware of what's going on, so he's cheating people out of $1,000. So you just want that those people should get their $1,000 back. And there's no other way if it fulfills all these conditions. But if you tell on him, forget the $1,000, he'll lose his entire business. That the whole thing will go under. So that takes a lot more consideration in weighing out the details before you speak Lashon Hara, right? If you just look at the pasuk above in source 2, we're always trying to weigh out 2 things. There's obviously lo sele, that we don't want to go around saying Lashon Hara. But there's another thing, that you shouldn't stand by and let someone else get hurt. So we're always trying to weigh out these 2 things in Lashon Hara when it comes to purpose so let me weigh out the purpose of what I'm about to say. Is it permissible for me to be saying? And on the other hand, what are the damages that are going to come out through that? And if I don't say something, what are the damages for the person that is being affected? So these are the 7 conditions. And these 7 conditions, I know we rattled them off quick, but these 7 conditions are ones that would make a lot of sense for just to read over a few times, to be able to think about. So these 7 things, these should go through the back of our mind before we say something. Now, the Chafetz Chaim lays out these 7 conditions. Truth is, the Chazon Ish and others say that once we have this concept of Lashon Hara L'Toeles, to say something purposeful, and there's a reason for it, and you're not trying to just spread nonsense, and you're not just trying to hurt someone else, but there's a real reason behind it. So as we said, it's Lashon Tov, it's good Lashon. So the Chazon Ish is quoted as saying, and a few others also, that all these 7 conditions, maybe you don't need all 7. You just need to know that what you're saying is proper, you're not exaggerating, and you're doing it for a proper purpose, right? So certainly there are those out there that say that these 7 conditions, we're not beholden to each and every single one of them. As a general rule, it makes a lot of sense, at least certainly when making big decisions about, does it make sense to be saying what I'm saying? Sometimes it's a very small decision. A juicy piece of Lashon Hara, it's a quick decision, maybe not so easy, but you don't have to run through all 7 rules to realize that whatever I'm about to say is not appropriate, right? Sometimes, though, all 7 rules are appropriate to run through our mind, to be able to think. So is there a real purpose in sharing what I'm sharing? Now, on a daily basis, of just when it comes to what's coming out of my mouth, as I said, maybe we're not running through all 7 conditions. When it comes to some of the questions about what I share on social media, what I read on social media, and what I might be posting or sharing with other people in terms of other businesses, so that for sure is where these 7 rules come into play. Because then I have to start thinking, so why am I sharing this? Is it an exaggeration? What are the damages, potential damages that will come out of it? And are there any other routes in order to accomplish this, right? So, yes.
You start getting businesses and stuff, very often businesses, but sometimes they're businesses, we know that's their owned by Jewish people, primarily Jewish people, work there and talk. If there's a business that's not a known Jewish business, you have no reason to believe they're owned by Jews or run by Jews, do these questions come up? If there are
So in Mirza Hashem, basically the question is, for anyone on Zoom, I don't know what people can hear here, but just the idea in general, what is our obligation and what is our relation to non-Jews when it comes to the laws of Lashon Hara? Mirza Hashem, next year we're really going to touch on that. We'll talk on that more. But on a practical level, Lamaisa, how we relate and what we say should remain consistent. And the reason why I say that is really because it goes back to those 2 sources, those 2 aspects of Lashon Hara. There's one aspect of the damages and the like, and one could argue, according to some sources, that there is no obligation as far as Lashon Hara might be technically permitted between me about another non-Jew. Some sources say not even. But on the other aspect that we talked about in the pasuk, that Leiselech Rachel is also about a character attribute. So whoever I'm talking about, I'm the one saying something negative. And so that should be consistent across the board, no matter who and what I'm talking about, right? Mirza Hashem, we'll talk about more next week in relation to into non-Jews and how that relationship works. But certainly for these purposes, I would really say it would be very wise, certainly for our own character building and our relationships to be very consistent in that regard. Okay. So now let's talk about a little about the idea of reviews and also other people going shopping and helping other people out. So when it comes to businesses, right? Imagine there's a business out there that's a little bit more expensive. So if they're overcharging by a 1/6, so obviously that's theft. It's onah. A person can't do that. That's not okay. And so running through those 7 conditions. So one could probably make a case, and the Chafetz Chaim explains that in such a case, if you need to warn someone about that this owner is really trying to rip them off, that's certainly appropriate. Now, when it comes to anything less than that, right? When it comes to just there are places more expensive, less expensive, and it's all within market value. Because nowadays, what is market value, right? The market value spans from here to there. It's huge nowadays. It depends on, are you in a convenience shop, in which case you're paying for convenience. Are you at the local store? Well, you're also paying for the local price because it's easier to go to than farther. So it's hard to argue that a more expensive store, that the owners are trying to rip people off, right? They're within their value, they're within their rights to be charging as they're charging. So there's no obligation to go along and say, oh, they're cheating people. Chas v'shalom, they're not cheating people. So now can I go along and tell people though, by the way, if you want cheaper meat, go to that place. If you want cheaper this, go to that place, right? Is that Lashon Hara, right? Is that within my right to be able to tell someone? So basically, if it's for the purpose of trying to help other people, if it's for the purpose of trying to help other people do their shopping wisely, and you're not trying to say, you're not overgeneralizing about the other store. You're not saying, oh, that place is so much more expensive. Everything they sell is more expensive, because that's obviously going to hurt them more because you're overgeneralizing. That's not true. Not everything is more expensive. Maybe a few items, maybe many items. But to tell a person, by the way, you can get this cheaper there, that's not Lashon Hara. You're trying to help out someone in that case. And you're probably also not ruining this other person's business. The overgeneralization, it would be. There's also an idea of my chazis. You could argue, one could argue, wait a second, so why am I helping this guy get a cheaper price, but then I'm hurting the store owner, right? So my chazis, meaning whose blood is redder in the sense of, who wins here? Certainly when it comes to family members, Rav Moshe Stormbach in source 8 talks about this, that when it comes to family members, there's a pasuk of from your flesh, from your family. So you shouldn't walk away, meaning we have to help family. And so someone who relies on us, someone who we're very close to, so to be able to turn to them and help them out, that would certainly be appropriate. But I think even other people, this doesn't fall under Lashon Hara to be able to tell someone how to shop in a smart way, right? Again, it has to be done in a proper way to be able to come out and say, oh, I don't like that place, don't shop there, or to overgeneralize, or even to say, by the way, to say about their product something negative. That's not so great, right? If you say about another place, oh, their produce is not so fresh. So that already went from objective to subjective, and that's already a problem. And two, that also could really hurt their general business, right? You're saying their stuff is generally not fresh. Now that's an overgeneralization. And what's more is now that person just has a general perspective on that store. Yes. But if it's true, so I think in this case, that gets down to the my chazis. That gets down to really weigh out who's really, should you be benefiting this person over the other person? I'm not sure if it would make sense. A person, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't think it would be appropriate to turn to this person's. I think it would be appropriate to tell another person, by the way, a certain place, if you're looking for fresh produce, is here. But to say about another place, not so fresh, that's already subjective. Some person find fresh, which others don't. So I think that's already subjective in a little bit of dangerous territory. Yes. Yeah, right.
But there are other times where they're selling, let's say, where a place is selling canned goods that are way past their date. And some people are very neurotic, they're checking everything on the shelf whenever they're buying it, but a lot of people, the store is taking care of it, up well within the date.
Mm-hmm.
And so if would it be right to point somebody to places like this, that it hasn't gotten out in the public, that, you go to places, you got to really watch.
I think in that case, so first of all, the store is aware of what they're doing, right? They're fully aware this is something they're comfortable with doing, perhaps. Sorry, the question was if you have if a place is selling, let's say, cans that are expired or the like. So would that be okay to tell someone? So again, the overgeneralization of this place, no good and whatever, but to tell someone, by the way, in particular, I noticed that the cans are out of date there. So just be aware when shopping there. So that's already something, just a warning and less so of a statement about the place. And I think that again falls into this smart consumer shopping. So the saying, it's interesting when it comes to, by the way, there would be a difference also to telling someone when they're about to buy a product on the conveyor belt, say, oh, you can get that cheaper somewhere else. So that's not a Lashon Hara issue as much as it's chotef, like you're essentially grabbing money away from this person, right? They're literally about to purchase the item from this seller, and you're literally grabbing money from the seller, right? So that might not be so appropriate, right? You walk down the lines in a store, no, that cheaper, price check, right? It wouldn't be so appreciated. I'll admit, I can't remember the last time I price checked on anything. I don't know. I go to the store and I think my wife tells me to check the price, so I look at it. and I buy it, and she asked me if I checked the price. I said, yeah, I looked at the price. I don't know, I don't know how to compare it, right? I'll be honest. But I think it would certainly be inappropriate to walk down the aisle saying price check, right? That's person's about to buy it. You're taking the money away from the seller in that case. Okay. So now when it comes to product reviews and book reviews, so what about that, right? I buy something from Amazon and I want to be able to review it. Let's say if I had a great time with it, I'm very happy with the product. So fantastic, leave a nice review. That's always welcome, right? But I had a very negative experience either with the seller or with the actual product. So what are my rights? What am I allowed to say and how can I be saying it? And what about book reviews, right? All the time there are book reviews, right? A person writes these things up all the time. So when it comes to book reviews, it's interesting. You could argue certainly that if a person wants their book to be reviewed, and they probably do because it gets them more publicity, it's out there in the magazines. So when a person sends their book in to get reviewed, so essentially they're agreeing to a certain level of criticism and positive remarks, because the idea is anything, hopefully it will help build up the hype and build up the book. And so when a person puts their product out there in that sense, there's a certain level of expectation and awareness that that's going to happen. And I think that's part of the argument that Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky and Emissy Yaakov puts forth. He understands that this is what's going to happen. Also, in general, this is fair product review, right? We're always trying. We want to be a consumer who's aware of what we're purchasing, and so we're trying to help people out in that regard. It's hard to say though if it's a purely scathing review. To leave a purely scathing review on a book or on whatever it is, 100% just brimstone, fire and brimstone on a person. It's very hard to say that they would have agreed to that they subjected themselves to that. So I think there's arguments to be said that it's purely scathing, and there's nothing positive, nothing good to be able to remark about this. So it might be the person didn't subject themselves to that. Now, that being said, I don't think most of us are reviewing books, putting them in the magazine, but what we are doing are reviewing products, right? I get a product. Can I review it online? Should I be reviewing it? And other people, right? I get a product and I want to warn other people that this is not a quality product. So I think actually in the back, there's a fantastic, last page, there's a fantastic English sefer I picked up a year ago or so, maybe a few months ago, by Rav David Jaffe. I think he actually lives in Baltimore. It's called What Can I Say Today? So in the back, he has responsa of Rav Yitzchak Berkowitz, and he basically outlines something very much in line with how the Chafetz Chaim had his 7 rules, and he outlines exactly what we should keep in mind when we're trying to review a product, right? When we're trying to review something. So one, I obviously we should keep in mind of what the damage is, and if it's warranted, right? Am I allowed to be saying what I'm saying? It can't be exaggerated. So I can't say something general about the seller or all his products, or that this was an entirely negative experience. But I could say this product itself, I found it to be lacking in whatever regard. It can't be out of revenge. Right? I might be upset at the seller, and he sold me a horrible product, and he wouldn't take it back. So I'm going to leave a bad review. So that's already motivated from a very unkosher place. So that would limit to what I can say. We have to know it's accurate, exactly what I'm saying. And we have to understand that when I'm rating it, I have to back it up, right? I have to be able to understand in a very factual way that people aren't just going to see stars, right? When it comes to Amazon, I could just leave 5 stars, 4 stars, whatever it is, but that doesn't actually tell a person what was negative about it, right? So if I leave 1 star, so that was, in a certain sense, exaggeration, or it wasn't exactly true, because what exactly is the person, when they come along reading now? They're just seeing 1 star, and they'll take that as a generalization over the entire product or business. So when leaving reviews, so it has to be done with a certain level of sensitivity, of awareness of the effects it might have. But certainly in this fair market world where we want to be knowing consumers and try to help other people out. So if it's done in these proper ways of first of all, from the proper perspective, no exaggeration, trying to do it and understanding this is not going to, sink a business. So there's certainly reason to be posting, to be able to be reviewed. There are a similar argument like book reviews, that if a person has these products and they have the reviews, the ability to be able to review it on Amazon, So they subjected themselves to that, meaning that's good for their business, right? It's good that people to be able to post things, that they'd be able to respond. You can make an argument that Google reviews is not the same, because Google reviews, I don't think companies set up, meaning just because you joined Amazon, well, because you joined Amazon, you understand you're setting up your business in a way that there will be reviews. I think you can have a business online, correct me if I'm wrong, but Google reviews is just on anything. I think our shul has Google reviews, and I don't think we set that up. Menashe, did we set that up?
They were getting Google, they never signed up with Google, they were getting these Google reviews, some of them not so good. And so the question was, which my job was to figure out how to get in so they could go ahead.
Right, exactly. So the idea of leaking a Google review, I never actually agreed to that. So I would argue that if you did not like a product from a certain business, that if it's from Amazon, it makes much more sense to be able to write the information, again, following the proper rules and advice here. But to just leave a simple Google review that's totally accessible to the public, who might not even be looking for that product or for that business, they just happen to see it, that it shows up. So that's spreading something in a much more large manner than would be appropriate and necessary, right? So I think that that's something to be sensitive for, because that's the idea of spreading something much more than it needs to be, which could hurt a person more so than necessary in this case. Okay. So now when we're talking about the idea of spread, and I know we're talking about a lot, we're talking about a large spread of information here right now. We're going, again, we're trying to just get an overview of a concept of things to be aware of, things to be sensitive towards. Again, I'm happy to talk about this in detail with anyone afterwards, certainly take any questions. But just for now, to be able to present the next idea, and that is the idea of public information. So when is something public enough that means that it's permissible to talk about? Or is it ever permissible to talk about something that's public enough, right? So there's really two concepts, a few more, but two concepts that we can boil this down to. And one is the idea of ba'apei tlasa. In source 12, the Gemara tells us, Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna, Kol milsa d'misamra ba'apei tlasa leis ba mishum lishnabisha. That anything that was said in the presence of three people, no problem, no Lashon Hara. Now, it might not have been appropriate to have been said in front of three people, but once it has, according to the Gemara, free reign, you can talk about it however you want. It's not so simple. First of all, even though the Chafetz Chaim brings this down references, it's not so simple that the Chafetz Chaim himself agrees to this as a general rule. And it's not so simple to say, once it's been in front of three people, no problem. One of the ways to explain the Gemara, well, first of all, not everyone explains the Gemara in this way, and that automatically gets rid of this permission of speaking Lashon Hara once it's been said in front of three people. But what's more is the concept is that if something was said in front of three people, they understand that it'll get out there. So they understand it was getting out there. So how much do they really care about it being said? It's hard to argue that's true in every case. And in general, this idea of ba'apei tlasa, just because, a friend of a friend, so people will talk, eventually it's going to get out. So if eventually it's going to get out, everyone knows, well, I can speak about it too. It's not so simple. And it's hard to argue that the Chafetz Chaim would actually say that that's the rule that you should follow. And what's more, by the way, even if it was said in front of three people and we think, oh, yay, it's permissible now. Well, it's not if your intention is to spread it more. I mean, just stam, like it comes up in conversation, fine. But to spread it more, no. Also to say it in a negative slant, no. So we just really severely limited this idea of once it was said in front of three people, right? It's not fair game. It's not a free reign after that. So what does that mean in today's day and age where just there's so much information out there? So everything said in front of three people, but we're saying it's very a limited understanding here. So there's another aspect, and that is davar mefursam, public information. And public information, you could argue that even the Chafetz Chaim agrees in certain cases is permissible. And again, we're going to talk about what does it mean that it's permissible to talk about public information. So the Rambam in source 13, he brings down this concept of I'm sorry. No, the Rambam's already talking about ba'apei tlasa. Okay, that was before. The idea of davar mefursam is that something has been spread so much so that everyone knows about it, at least wherever it's being talked about. Everyone knows about it. And the Azni Dabru in source 14, Rabbi Binyamin Zilber actually says that it's like you're talking to a wall, meaning if I talk to someone and they already know this information, everyone knows this information, so who more am I spreading it to? I'm talking to the wall, right? So we would have thought that therefore, if it's public information, public knowledge, everyone around me knows, so then it's okay to talk about. But even that's limited, and that's something to be very sensitive to. See, we live in a world, as we said, that everything is known. And so automatically we think if everyone knows it and it's totally known, it's davar mefursam, it's public knowledge, public information. So what that means is I'm not spreading it any more than it is. And so it's totally permissible for me to talk about it. But it's not true because, first of all, it can't just be that I'm talking about it in order to spread it more, right? Because again, why am I trying to spread this public information that might be negative about a person, negative about a situation? Well, why am I trying to spread it? Now, obviously, if someone is a public menace, obviously, if there's a situation which people need to know about for safety or for whatever purposes, that's not what we're talking about. That's a whole nother conversation, and it's obvious in those sort of cases that's a totally different situation which needs to be discussed, and very often it needs to be that people are aware of what's going on. And we're talking here just about a negative slant on someone in the newspaper or in the news on social media. So I assume it's public information. So public information does not mean I can just go around spreading it. Stop. Now, if I'm trying to spread it, trying to get everyone to know about it, so that's already strike one. I can't add any negative slants. I can't exaggerate. That's certainly not. So the idea being is that if it comes up, it's not inappropriate to talk about. Certainly, but it has to fall within that category. That I'm not trying to spread it more. I'm not saying, oh my gosh, did you hear the news, right? And I can't be adding anything negative. And I can't be exaggerating. And that's very clear about public information. See, public information just doesn't mean it can be spread about throughout wherever I want. And nowadays, we also think public information means everyone knows. Now, it's not true. What happens in one town, yes, with social media, things spread, but it doesn't always mean what happens in one town, the other town really knows about or everyone knows about there. So what might be public information in one area is not public information in the other area. And that's something else to be very sensitive to of what we're spreading. Now, there obviously is an argument when things are written in the newspaper or things are written on social media that when someone puts something out there, so we can presume, you would think that we can presume that it's true. Because if you're putting something out there, it's going to be easily fact-checked. People are going to find out about it. People can look into it. And so you would presume and you would hope that if someone's putting something out there, information where multiple people are going to learn about it, so hopefully that means it's true and therefore you can believe it. So it's a nice argument. And maybe at some point it was true in life. But nowadays, with the advent of social media, in the sense that anyone could post whatever they want, and children play. What's this? There's a psychology term that when you play peekaboo with a baby, right? So they can't see you, so that means that you don't exist. What's the term? Someone remind me. You know the term? Object permanence. Yes. So we live in a world of object permanence. If they can't see me, then I can't see them and I can write whatever I want, right? That's the idea of sitting behind a computer, sitting behind a phone. So, well, no one can see me, I can't see them. So, okay, I can just write, right? It really does remove the humane aspect. I was driving the other day and we needed to, or my wife was driving and I was in the passenger seat and we needed to get over a lane and they weren't letting us in. So I stuck out my head and just waved to a person and they saw another person. And when you see another person, well, you're much friendlier actually, because until you see the person, you can just pretend it's a car, right? It's an inanimate object. But if there's a person actually that you see, so automatically your humane side is sparked. And so that's the truth when it comes to the idea of social media and posting things and writing things. So it's not always true that something that's written is certainly, we can presume it to be true because, well, a person knew it was going to get out there. So certainly when it comes to believing it, we can't believe things that are posted automatically. Now, when it comes to the ability, should I be aware of it? Can I be aware of it if it pertains to me to be a little bit more careful? Yeah, certainly. But again, we have to realize, does it pertain to me or not? So again, this idea just to realize the davar mefursam, to be able to realize that something that is known to all, it might not always mean it's known to all. And even when it is, if I'm going to share this, if it's going to be the discussion topic at whatever table, so then it should give us pause to think about, so am I adding negative slant? Is the reason I'm sharing this because I'm trying to just spread it more? Or does it make a nice fun story and I can exaggerate it to get some laughs? So if any of those are checked off, so that automatically says whatever public knowledge it might be, assuming it was public knowledge, wherever we are, so that automatically tells us it's inappropriate to be sharing. Because again, this goes back to what we started with. It's not just about causing damages. It might be true. It's like speaking to the walls that no one more is going to know about this. The minute I opened my mouth, everyone already knew about it. So it's not, is it causing more damages? Is it causing more embarrassment? Maybe not. But the character trait of what that does to me as a person, what comes out of my mouth, what I'm careful, my thoughts about other people in the world, so that certainly it affects. And one could certainly argue that in many cases, by repeating the information, it buttresses it in other people's minds. It might be, certainly if it's rechilas, if you're telling another person, someone said something about you, they already know. But to tell them a second time, it might actually upset them more. It might reinvigorate those hard emotions, how upset a person might be. So we always have to give pause and think about, so even if it is known, how much more am I spreading it? And is there a real purpose to that, right? Okay, so yeah. It's also interesting, just on that last thing, I did see there's something also known as the illusory truth effect. And that is that the more I hear something and the more something is repeated, the more true it becomes. And so even if it might not be true, or I would have only been kosher, sure, I would have just been careful about it, but I wasn't actually believing it. But the more it's repeated, the more I repeat it, the more I hear it, the more actually true it becomes in this world, in the reality, right? And the truth is, when you speak about something, it makes it real. And so again, even if something's davar mufursim, even if it's true and it's out there and the like, but to be repeating it, spreading it for no purpose, so then it just doesn't seem appropriate. And by the way, that also goes, we have to think about what relates to me, what relates to my family, what relates to my community, because things that relate to us and we have to think about, so obviously that matters to be aware of and to be able to speak about in appropriate fashion. But just the world at large, there's so much to talk about. There's so much negativity. If you open up a newspaper, it's fascinating. Try this. It's an interesting exercise. Open up a newspaper and just go through the columns. Count the negative articles versus positive articles, right? We're not about positivity. Positivity does not sell. Negativity sells, right? So that's already something. Do I want to be part of that spread of negativity in this world, or do I want to be a positive person? A person that tries to spread positivity in my life, in my family's life, in the world at large. And that's certainly something that gets back to this idea. Lashon Hara is not just the idea of spreading around something that causes damages, but it's the idea of what it means to me as a person, of what comes out of my mouth. I'll just end with the following idea. And that is, we just had Parshas Pinchas. So it's interesting. In Parshas Pinchas, so when the whole story of Yisroel following prey to the women of Midian happens. So when that happens in Parshas Balak, we're not told who actually did it. We're not told the leaders who were involved, right? Zimri, Kazbi. We're not told who was involved. We're only told in the next parsha, in Parshas Pinchas. So says the Orach Chaim, I don't understand. If Hashem wanted us to know who was involved in this grave error and sin, so he should have told us when it happened. Why did Hashem, first of all, if he doesn't want us to know, so then leave it out completely. And if he wants us to know, so then record it in the previous parsha instead of writing extra psukim in this parsha. The Torah is not writing anything extraneous, so why write it here? So the Orach Chaim says something tremendous, something beautiful. He says, Achen in source 16, Hinei ha'adom baruchu eino chafetz l'zalze afilu b'rashayim lefarse mi ba'alei dvarim hamitoavim. He says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not in the business of putting people down, of embarrassing people. When it's necessary for people to know, when it was necessary for people to know who was involved, to be able to show that there's even greater what Pinchas did, that Pinchas came along and he did what he did even in the face of these types of leaders, of these types of people who are not just regular people. They were leaders in Klal Yisrael and obviously Midian, and yet he did what he did. Then there was a purpose to be able to know what happened. But until there wasn't a purpose to turn it into a davar meforsim, that everyone should know, that we should know who was involved. And so nowadays, when we think about this, do I really need to know who was involved in this scandal or that scandal? Does it really relate to my life? If Hashem didn't record one of these biggest sins in the Torah, didn't record who did it at the time because it just wasn't necessary. So is it really necessary that I should share this scandal, that happened, this happened, whether the world at large or in my community or the local area? Probably not, right? So it just goes to show, the power that we have of the tongue, the power of our speech, and how careful we should think before we actually say what we're saying. And again, it really comes down to a beautiful sense that, of course, there are times that we have to say what we need to say. But if we just give a little bit more pause to be able to think, is this something necessary? Is this something that everyone knows about? And if everyone knows about, do people need to know about it more? Is there a purpose to it? And if I'm trying to help people, certainly it makes sense. But if there's no purpose behind it, so that's a moment where I sit back and say, well, instead, do I want to mimic Hashem? Do I want to think about what Hashem did and not spreading things that weren't necessary at a time that wasn't necessary? And that's something that, each and every single one of us should want to be able to mimic. Just for the next 3 minutes, if anyone has questions, we can take. I'll just want to end a few minutes before Mincha to not make sure we don't go late. I'm sorry, Steve, you had a question? Okay, yes.
There's one in the local one,
Right.
what side and others say that what's the whole purpose of spirit?
Thank you, everyone.
It's the pleasure, etc., etc.
Right.
Because if you're not doing that, you have no right at all to use the spirit.
Right, correct. We have to, again, we always have to make that cheshbon, yeah.
No right.
Perfect.
At all.
Right. Good. We always have to make that. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for coming, both in person, both on Zoom. And Mirz Hashem, same time next week, an hour before Mincha. And next week will be the topic of, I think next week's topic is the idea of therapy, the purpose of Lashon Hara in therapy, or their permissibility, and when it comes to venting to spouses, family and friends and the like, and also confidentiality rules. And Mirz Hashem, we'll talk about those concepts next week. Thank you, everyone.